That's my family. Ministry's going really well. So I've been just finishing 5 years in my role at Queensland Baptist as the Director of Church Health, adding regional ministers to that as well. And just a real joy to travel around the state and to serve and bless churches, to help them be captivated by Jesus, to help them be godly and strategic, reaching their communities, encouraging churches to do Alpha. This year, Alpha tells us there will be 1 million Australians that have completed Alpha. About halfway through the year, we reckon we're going to tip over the million number. So if you I don't know, is Alpha even a thing? 1 million Australians will have done Alpha by the end of this year. Huge. Loving ministry is going really well. Living in Edens Hill on the north side of Brisbane, involved in Bridgman Church when I can get there. But a lot of the time, I'm doing this. I'm out with God's people right across Queensland. Quick update. That's us. Xavier recently said to me, he said, "Dad, I know you don't want to hear this, but you probably dunked your last basketball." Man, it was hard to hear because I'm 44 years old. I used to be able to dunk a basketball pretty easily, not so much anymore. In fact, the last time I tried, I'm glad no one had a phone and a camera out because I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. That part of my life is over. In fact, I'm slowly coming to terms with the reality that I'm unlikely at 44 to be a professional athlete. Unless it's, maybe darts or bowls. Those are my only two options. I did play pickleball over the holidays, and that was fun too. So maybe there's an avenue for me there in pickleball. But it's true. I was telling a friend of mine this, and he said, "Do you know statistically that once you turn 35 years old, most people, almost everyone, never sprints again?" Never sprint. When you're a kid, man, if you go shopping with your mum, you are sprinting down the aisles. You sprint every chance you get when you're a kid, but once you turn 35, that's over. Never sprint again. It's interesting, isn't it? It comes as we grow older, we kind of get captivated by this idea that I'm too old for that. That's never going to happen for me. But we never tell our kids you're too young. We never tell our kids, "Oh, you could never do that." We say to our kids, "You could do anything. If you work hard, there's nothing that you can't do." But we tell ourselves all the time, we're too old for that. We're past it. Things are never going to change for us. I guess I better just get used to the fact that when I stand on my scales, that's my number from this point forward, and it's only going to go up from here, We become resigned to the fact that this is it. What I find so interesting is that we apply a lot of the same kind of thinking that, "Oh, well, I guess this is it for me now." We apply that often in our relationship with God. We think, well, 5 years ago, I thought I would be more involved in church, closer with Jesus, more connected to God in worship, that I would have read more of the Bible and be able to quote more memory verses, that I would have shared my faith with more of my friends. But I guess that's just never happened for me, and maybe for the next 5 years, I need to get used to the reality that maybe this is it for me. I think so many times in our lives, I certainly see this all the time in my own life and in the lives of other people, where people look back and they say, "Do you know, I used to be so passionate about sharing my faith, so passionate about growing in my relationship with God, so passionate about worship. I used to long to be closer to God, and I used to have these expectations in my spiritual life that I was going to grow and develop and prosper, but I guess that hasn't happened for me, so I guess this is it." We lose momentum in our spiritual life. Maybe you've experienced this slow stalling of your faith journey. And I think part of the problem is that we accept that. We say, "Oh, well, I guess this is as close to Jesus as I'm ever going to be. I must just accept it. Oh, well, I guess I'm never going to find prayer easier than I do now, so I guess I better just accept it. Oh, well, my life is so busy, I don't really have time to serve in the local church. I guess this is it for me. I'm never going to dunk a basketball again, so to speak. That's interesting because our beliefs haven't changed, our theology hasn't been transformed, and usually actually our values haven't changed either. And in fact, we still want everyone else around us to grow and prosper in their faith. There are so many older Australians who send their children and grandchildren to Sunday schools, to RI. They say, I want you to have a faith. I want you to know about this. I want you to prosper in this way. But I guess for me, that part of my life is over. Do you know what I'm talking about? I think this is such a common experience that we lose momentum in our spiritual lives and we just accept the fact that this is how it's always going to be. It's been too long. Didn't work last year. It's not going to change. I'm too busy. I guess this is it for me. And I just want to tell you today that that is not true. That is not true. There is a fresh start waiting for you in 2025. You do not have to accept that this is how it's always going to be. God has a fresh start in store for you. And I just want to unpack what that might look like. And I want to take us to the passage we read before in Exodus 3, the story of Moses. If there was ever someone who thought he'd missed his chance, if there was ever someone who thought my life is over, if there was ever someone who thought I can't come back from here, there is no way forward for me, it was Moses. Moses lived to be 120 years old. I'd like to know what his diet is, because I think that's pretty good. 120 years. The first 40 years, he was raised as royalty in Egypt. Right? But knowing that he was a Hebrew. The second 40 years, he's literally roaming the wilderness working for his father-in-law. And then the third 40 years, he's leading God's people, parting the Red Sea, going toe-to-toe with Pharaoh, going up the mountain, receiving the 10 Commandments. Incredible. 3 40-year blocks in his life. And Moses has a fresh start. And I want to take us to this. So in Exodus chapter 2, we see Moses' great failure. So he's 40 years old. He's a prince in Egypt. He's powerful, connected, educated, affluent, everything. But he knows that he's a Hebrew. And one day he sees an Egyptian slave driver, soldier, mistreating one of the Hebrew people, one of God's people, who took shelter there 400 years earlier. Joseph, Jacob, the whole story. Go back and read Genesis if you're not keeping up. So Moses sees this Hebrew being mistreated, and he takes matters into his own hands. He feels entitled to try and take action. So he takes action, he kills the Egyptian, pushes him into the sand, and he gets covered up, like bury the body in the cement slab. No one will ever know, right? That's what Moses thinks. But it becomes discovered, and when Moses realizes what he's done, he runs. I picture Moses being like, can I get that 5 seconds again? Can I just do a do-over? Because that 5-second window where I said, hey man, leave that guy alone, pushed him under killed him, buried him, and then realized, uh-oh. Have you ever had a moment you wish you could do that again? Have you ever had a car crash where you're like, if I just didn't change lanes at that moment, I wouldn't have hit that car? Or you crash your mountain bike, and you think, oh, if I just taken the B line, the easy line, I wouldn't have ended up with a broken arm. And a broken bike, more importantly. Hey, Jeff, because that matters more than a broken arm. See the picture of the guy in hospital, and he's in a full-body cast, and he says, Doc, give it to me straight. Is my bike okay? You just want that 5 seconds again. This is Moses' experience. He just wishes he could have that moment again. But the cat's out of the bag. It's too late. His life takes a dramatic change. And we see in verse 15 of chapter 2, when Pharaoh heard about this, he tried to kill Moses, his adopted grandson, basically. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. His life is out of control, so he just takes off and he runs into a place the place is Midian. Not a very nice place. Runs into the desert, sits down by a well, by himself, exhausted, isolated, disappointed. His life is over as far as he's concerned, right? Meets a girl there, marries her, starts working for her dad. As a man in your 40s, I live with my in-laws, I work for my father-in-law. I'm not sure if that's a story that you want to tell. It's probably not one that I want to tell. In fact, things are so bad, he names his firstborn son a name that means foreigner or alien or stranger. Puts a photo up on the screen. That's my eldest. His name's Stranger, because I feel like a stranger. That's his brother Weirdo, because sometimes I feel weird, you know. Hey. That's very funny. Round of applause. Well played. Right? He names his son Stranger here, outcast, alien. Moses is having an identity crisis. He is having a massive tragedy. And Moses is thinking, I never thought my life would turn out like this. Working for my father-in-law in the desert, cut off from all the Egyptian people who I grew up with, plus the Hebrew people who I really belong to. I'm with another whole group of strangers, the Midianites, in the middle of Midian. His life is over. Tragic circumstances. And, you know, maybe that's your story. There was a moment for you, a 5-second window where something happened that drastically altered your life, a decision, an incident, an action. Maybe it happened to you, maybe it was your decision. And you look back and you think, man, I never thought my life would be here. There may be a few of us, but I think for most of us what happens is not a drastic event like that. I think for most of us what happens is that we just sort of drift, and then at some point we stop and we look back and we say, how did I get here? My life has just, or my faith have just fizzled out and stalled, and I feel a bit lost. I feel a bit like an alien here. So here's Moses, 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the desert, 40 years on the run, 40 years in his own personal wilderness with his wife and his kids and working for his father-in-law, a shepherd out by himself. And then we have this moment in Exodus chapter 3 where God encounters Moses and gives him a fresh start. And I want to just go through this and pull out some principles for us that apply to our lives. They can help you restart your stalled faith. They can help you have a fresh start in 2025. Sound good? Let's take a look. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I love how this sounds so composed. Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. We're pretty sure Moses wrote Exodus, so we think he's probably just, I freaked out, and after I calmed down a little bit, I went and had a look. I think that's more likely what happened. When the Lord saw that he had gone to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer. God said, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. First thing I want to say, first principle for us, is that if your faith journey has stalled, God has not forgotten about you. He has not forgotten about you. You might be in the wilderness. You might be up a mountain on the far side of the wilderness, totally on your own, thinking my life is over, God's forgotten about me. He has not forgotten about you. God reaches out to Moses. Do you notice that? God initiates with Moses. God speaks first. God lights the bush. God meets him there. God has not forgotten about Moses. God remembers him. God reaches out. God initiates. And it's the same with you. If you think, man, my faith journey's kind of stalled and I guess this is it for me, it's not. God longs for deeper intimacy with you. He wants you to be on fire for Jesus. His heart for you is that you would be connected to him, that you would be fruitful in ministry, and that you would receive, return, and reflect his love into this world. He hasn't forgotten about you. He's calling you. In fact, as I was driving here and praying, I was praying, Lord, as we read these passages together and as we share together, may you call Moses, Moses, to people sitting in the congregation today thinking, I guess this is it for me. My faith journey has stalled. God desires a meaningful relationship with him. God describes himself, Jesus describes God the Father as the lovesick father who is waiting at the gate, desperately longing for his children to come home. Describes God the Father as the shepherd who leaves the 99 and goes after the one, who searches high and low to find the lost sheep. He describes Father God as a woman who turns her house upside down, like living with teenagers, right? To find the lost coin. God has not lost interest in you. He desperately, desperately, desperately wants to reignite your faith journey, wants to go deeper with you. That's number one. Number two, when God speaks your name, say, here I am. That's what Moses does. God speaks from within the burning bush, and Moses answers, here I am. He responds to God's invitation. That's the first step, to acknowledge, actually, I think God is speaking to me. I think the Holy Spirit's at work. I think this passage is for me. I think the sermon is for me. It's happening now. It doesn't need to be a sermon. It can be a sunset. But a time when God reaches out to you and says, Moses, Moses. And despite all that's happened, despite all the drama killing the slave, despite Pharaoh trying to kill him, despite going to the wilderness, despite feeling like a stranger and an outcast, despite all of the drama and failure and everything, when God says, Moses, Moses, Moses still says, here I am. And you can do the same. Doesn't matter what's happened before. Doesn't matter what's happened before. It doesn't matter what's happened before. When God speaks your name, answer, here I am. Number three, recognize your own sinful frailty in the light of God's awesomeness and power. Do you know what it means to fear the Lord? So fear, Tim Keller says this, is so profound. He says to fear God, it's the two things you hold in tension. It is awe and respect. The strongest awe and respect, coupled with the deepest of love and affection. That's what it means to fear the Lord. Not to be afraid of God, but to hold him as awesome and holy, to respect him, to revere him, but also to love and serve. That's what it means to fear the Lord. And this is what Moses does. When God says, Moses, Moses, what does Moses do? He hides his face. Why does he hide his face? What is going on in that action? Well, it's twofold. One, it's the brilliance of God, even speaking through a burning bush. The Lord is awesome. It's a holy place. God is wonderful. God lives in, the New Testament tells us, in unapproachable light. He's awesome. So he shields himself from God's awesomeness, his wonder and splendor and power and majesty, but he also hides himself in humility. He recognizes God's awesomeness and his own brokenness and frailty. It's not a conversation of equals when you meet God face to face. He is awesome and you are not. And this is what Moses does. He is aware of his own brokenness. God goes on to say, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And the implication here is God saying, I am the God who knows you, Moses. You cannot hide from me. I know who you are. You're exposed. You cannot hide from me. I see you. But I also love you. And my plan is to draw you close to myself. Moses is confronted with the holiness of God, with the goodness of God, with the power of God, and in that moment he recognizes his own frailty his own brokenness, his own tragedy, his own lack of power and goodness, right? This is what's happening for Moses, and it's the same for us. Part of your way back, part of restarting your stalled faith, part of a fresh start is to recognize there is a God, and it is not you. That God is awesome and holy and wonderful and powerful, and that you are not. That you are, like all of us, weak people who sin, who live with guilt and shame and powerlessness. And until you reach that moment of humility before the Lord, there's no way forward. You have to recognize God's awesomeness and his goodness and respond in humility. Number 4, own your own excuses, but don't let them stop you being obedient. I love this about Moses, right? The Lord said, I've indeed seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. This is verse 7. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the land of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Sounds like a building site. Now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. Verse 10. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. God sends him back to the scene of the crime. Did you notice that? Moses' life is a train wreck. He names his kid Stranger, because he feels like a stranger. He feels like he doesn't belong anywhere. And God says, I'm going to rescue my people. I know you. I see you. And by the way, I'm sending you. You're my plan, Moses. And I imagine Moses halfway through that being like, yes, rescue the people, see the oppression, lead the people out of Egypt, into their own land, the land of our fathers. Awesome, awesome. Sorry, God, can we just go back a little bit? It sounds for a moment, just for a second there, it sounded like you were saying that I was going to have to go back to Pharaoh. And God's like, I'm going to send you back, buddy. How'd it go last time? How'd it go last time you tried to save the people, hey? When you intervened, when you took matters into your own hands, how was that? It was a disaster. God sends him back to the very place of his greatest failure. But this time, with the power of God, on a mission from God to do God's work, okay? And Moses lists all of his excuses and insecurities. I wrote a few down for you. 3:11. But Moses said, who am I that I should go to Egypt and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? 3:13. Moses said to God, suppose I go back to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? 4:1. Moses answered, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Verse 10 of chapter 4. The Lord said to Moses, pardon your servant, Lord. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue. And my favorite one, verse 13. But Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. He just lists all of these excuses. I don't know your name. What if they don't believe me? I'm not very good at speaking. Surely there's someone else, Lord, who can go instead of me. But despite all of that, he still obeys. The same for you. So you need to do this too, right? If you're going to have a fresh start and restart your stalled faith, you have to own your own excuses. You've got to say, yep, you know what? Last time I did try, it didn't work. I do have doubts about this, that, or the other. I wonder how long I can sustain a yearly Bible reading plan. Own your excuses, own your doubts, put them all out there, but take them to God. Exhaust your excuses before God. Lay it all out there. God can handle it. Yeah, but, what about? Put it all out there. But don't let that stop you obeying. And that's the next point. Obey despite your past failures. Verse 19 of chapter 4. Now the Lord said to Moses in Midian, go back to Egypt, for those who wanted to kill you are dead. So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started back to Egypt. And he took the staff of God in his hand. Moses voices his own excuses. He complains to God. He lists them and he names them. But he still goes. He still goes. He packs up his donkey and his family and he heads on the long journey back to Egypt. He obeys despite the obstacles, despite the past failures, despite the false starts. And it's the same for you. You just have to obey. Do the thing God's telling you to do. That's how you restart your stalled faith journey. And the last one, number 6, rejoin God's people. This is key. Moses went back to the people. He became their leader. He goes down in history as one of the most, he has no last name. That's how famous he is. You just say Moses, everyone's like, hey, the guy from the burning bush in the Red Sea. Yep, that Moses. But Moses comes back and he rejoins God's people. He integrates back into community life. Did you notice that? He doesn't just stay by himself. He's part of the crew. He joins the family. He re-engages with God's people. He made God's people his people. And you need to do that too. If you're going to restart your stalled faith, maybe you've been at church for a long time and you're kind of here today for the first time thinking, oh, I really should go to church. It's been ages. Probably not going to work, but I'll give it a go. It's the first Sunday in January. Here I am. You need to make God's people your people. You need to get involved. That's why every pastor in Australia, every single Sunday says, please stick around for coffee, join a small group, get involved in serving, invite a friend. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to meet you. Can we come and visit you? Because we're trying to make God's people your people. And that's key. If your faith journey is going to flourish, you have to be connected to the community and family of God. So we can spur each other on. We can pray for each other. We can champion each other. We can encourage each other. We're not meant to be alone. We're part of a community. Last one, let it open up a whole new chapter of faithful service and deep encounter. Faithful service and deep encounter. Moses served God faithfully the next 40 years. Whole new chapter of leadership, of ministry, of miracles, right? And intimacy with God. Moses saw God face to face. He spent time up in the cloud, up the mountain, face to face with God in prayer and worship. Him and God were so close that he had to wear a veil when he came down the mountain. So close. And that can be the same for you. This restarting your stalled faith, following these steps, saying, here I am, Lord, when God speaks to you, realizing that God hasn't forgotten about you, owning your excuses, obeying despite of them, taking action, rejoining God's people. All of this will lead to faithful, fruitful service and deep encounter with God. I desperately believe it. This is the future God has for you. As I was preparing today, I came across this story of this guy called Carl Newton. And Carl Newton, Australian guy, and I want to read you some of his story. And I found this from the Inside Out website. So ministry to people in jail, prison ministry. It's actually a beautiful picture. It's part of Queensland Baptist Care Arm Community, but there's Southport Church of Christ is involved as well. So I kind of love the local church, the wider ministry, the whole bit. And it's really a story about a guy who thought his life was over, who got a fresh start, and I wanted to share it with you today. This is from the Inside Out website from a few years ago. Carl was a typical pastor's kid, going to church on Sundays with his two brothers, attending the boys' club every week and helping out with his dad, odd jobs around the church building. From an early age, it was clear that Carl was the rascal of the family, and his parents used to joke that babysitters never came back twice to their house. I love that. He had a big personality, a spirited nature. That meant he was quite a handful. At age 8, Carl gave his life to God. He was surrounded by positive influences of a godly people in his church, and he understood what it meant to be a true follower of Jesus, so a child convert, integrated into the community. Fast forward a couple of years, and Carl encountered a new group of friends at high school. They were nothing like his friends at church, and he found himself dabbling in a double life, attending church on Sundays, and then secretly smoking and drinking with his other friends whenever he could. Carl will never forget the look on his mother's face when at age 14 he told her that he didn't want to go to church anymore. He recalls the tears of heartbreak rolling down her cheeks, but he was tired of living a double life. It was time to make a choice. He progressed from smoking cigarettes to marijuana and then on to speed and ecstasy and finally the needle. His life took a downward spiral with a crescendo at age 17 when he got his driver's license. To Carl, this meant complete independence. He no longer had to report the whereabouts of his whereabouts to his parents. He could take off whenever he felt like it. Carl started an apprenticeship as a carpenter by day, but partied by night. Earning $163 a week as a first-year apprentice, his wages could not support his drug habit, so he started committing crime. You can see these series of small decisions in Carl's life, right? He tried turning his life around a number of times, even heading interstate to get off drugs, but when he came back, it would start up again. At 24, Carl was caught red-handed by the police, driving a stolen truck loaded with stolen goods. He found himself in a cell awaiting sentence at Arthur Gorey Correctional Center, where he met prison chaplain George Stubbs. I love how God's people are in dark places. Don't you love that? That's where we need to go and bring the light, isn't it? So good. Carl was caught in a vicious cycle that saw him in and out of prison for around 12 years. Each time, George Stubbs, the chaplain, would faithfully visit him. Carl recalls the comfort of seeing George's friendly face each week, reminding him that God still loved him even here on the inside. It was a pleasant reprieve from the negativity of prison life. Carl started attending church services in jail, rejoins God's people. And he recalled that moment when, as an 8-year-old boy, he gave his life to Jesus. Was it too late now to honor that promise? He thinks there's no way back, right? God's stirring in his heart. God's calling his name. He's connecting a bit with people on the inside who love the Lord. But he has these doubts. Can I restart my stalled faith? Is there a fresh start for me now? Carl made the life-changing decision to sever ties with his old friends and run headfirst back into the direction of his childhood faith. Upon release from prison, Carl paid his way through university and worked hard to get his builder's license. Not easy to do with a criminal record. Now he provides building services and temporary accommodation for patients flown down from the local hospital from rural properties. Today you'll find Carl sitting with his mum and dad in church, just like he used to all those years ago. And on April 10, 2016, Carl's dad had the great privilege of baptizing his son at Southport Church of Christ. The prodigal son had returned home, and Carl's mother watched on, this time with happy tears in her eyes. In fact, you can jump on the website and you can watch that baptism service on YouTube from the Southport Church of Christ YouTube channel. Powerful story, isn't it? Of a guy who thought, my life is over, I'm in jail, God's forgotten about me, but God hadn't forgotten about him. God had a plan and a purpose for him. Do you know, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's several times where the writers refer to Moses as this same Moses. This same Moses. Stephen does it in the book of Acts. It happens throughout the Old Testament too. And it's like, yeah, you guys know Moses. You know Moses, Pharaoh's son, the boy in the basket from the river, fished out by Pharaoh's daughter, grew up. Yeah, that Moses, the same Moses. Yeah, Moses who was famous in Egypt, who was like a prince in Egypt. Yeah, that Moses. Yeah, same guy actually, same Moses who killed that slave driver, who Pharaoh tried to kill, who ran for his life, who wandered through the wilderness. Same guy, the same Moses. In fact, it's the same Moses who sat down at a well and met this girl from Midian, fell in love, married her. Yeah, same guy named his kid Stranger. What a weird thing to do. It's the same Moses. Same Moses that for 40 years felt like an outsider, like a loser, like a failure, who wandered around looking after his father-in-law's sheep. Same guy. It's the same Moses. Yeah, that's true story, same Moses. This same Moses. This Moses who met God at the burning bush. This Moses who fumbled through his excuses but went anyway. The Moses who went toe-to-toe with the most powerful man on the planet, the Pharaoh of Egypt. Moses who did miracles. Moses who led the people through the Red Sea. It's the same Moses. Moses who took God's people into the wilderness, built a tabernacle. They worship God, the priesthood, the sacrifices. The Moses who goes up the mountain, meets God face to face in a cloud, brings down the 10 Commandments. He's glowing so much from being in God's presence. The same Moses. The Moses who wrote the Ten Commandments, the Moses who we think wrote the first few books of the Bible. It's the same Moses. Moses the prince, Moses the loser, Moses the champion and hero. It's the same Moses. And I think the writers do that because they want to remind us to see the whole story. That your story is not over. That God has not forgotten about you. And if you feel like you're flat or stalled in your faith, my friends, there is a fresh start for you. If you would just respond, here I am, when God speaks. I want to lead us in prayer as we finish today. And maybe for you, this is a bit of a turning point for you. Maybe this is your burning bush moment and you need to take your shoes off because you're on holy ground. Maybe for you, this is a time where you say, Lord, I had given up hope that my faith could change. I had resigned myself to the fact that I'm always going to be here. But I'm beginning to believe that you have a fresh start for me, that your mercies are new every morning, that you are a lovesick father desperately trying to get his family back together. And I've just been praying for you, friends, that for many in this room, some drastic like Carl, but I think for a lot of us, it's just that sense of we've accepted the fact that this is as good as it's going to get. And it's just simply not true. God desires to go deeper with us. He desires to go deeper with us. Fruitful service, strong encounter. So let me lead us in prayer. Let's pray together. Father God, I thank you that you're a God of love, that you're a God of mercy, that you're the God of second chances, that you're the God who never gives up on us. Lord, you never lose interest in us. You desire intimacy with us. You desire, Lord, for us to carry the good news of the gospel, to bear kingdom fruit in our families and communities and lives, Lord. And Lord, for those here today who have believed the lie that this is as good as it's going to get, that they can't change from here, Lord, I pray that you would break in, Holy Spirit, in power, that you would break into their lives, that they would have a burning bush moment. Maybe it's even happening right now, Lord. That they would respond by saying, here I am. Here I am. I'm going to name and own my excuses, but I'm going to obey anyway. And the thing you're calling me to do, Lord, I'm going to do that thing. Maybe it's invite someone to Alpha because I've lost confidence that the gospel really does change lives. Maybe it's doing the Bible reading plan because I've lost confidence that your word is powerful and light and life. Maybe it's getting up half an hour earlier because I desperately want to spend time with you in prayer because I believe that you are life itself, love itself. Lord, would you move in power, I pray. Would today be a day that people tell a story about 5-10 years from now, about a time when their lives were transformed, where they turned things around, where they got a fresh start, whether it's in a big way, Lord, or a small way. Just before we sing, I just want to give you just 30 seconds just to be present to the God who's present to you, to stand before the burning bushes as we keep playing quietly, and just say, Lord, what do you want to say to me? Holy Spirit, what do you want to say to me? Just for 30 seconds or so, and then the team will lead us. Thank you.